So let's take a look at what we're here to do today. So the first thing is, what is trust? We're going to find out what it is and why it's important and how to build that trust. And we're going to take a look at what doesn't build the trust and then some exercises to develop that trust building skill. So what is trust to you? I'm just going to throw this question out to the group, and I want to know, what does trust mean to you? Feel free to just unmute and chime in.
Trust is a feeling you get from a person that you know that whatever you speak to him, that he is listening and that he is aware of what you're going through, and it's vice versa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, David.
Go ahead, John.
Okay, I would add that trust to me is empathetic. The person is understanding what you're saying. I have confidence in them, and I trust them not to share without my permission. Pretty much like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
for me, Tom, trust is that I'm not going to be harmed. I'm in a safe place. I feel safe with you as a person.
Yeah, thank you, Attila.
I would say that trust for me, a big part of that plays in not feeling judged by the person that I'm sharing that information with. A lot of the other parts were already said, but I think that's another element for me that's huge, is feeling that what I'm sharing isn't going to the person that I'm sharing with isn't going to judge me in a space that makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah, thank you for that. Okay. Anyone else?
Trust for me is the ability to let go and let whatever needs to happen, and to rely on the people around me, that they're going to look after me and take care of me, and that I can be relied upon to do the same for them.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Definitely. So I really appreciate all the shares. That all of that definitely rings true to me as well. What I want to share with you is that trust can also be defined as a belief that someone is good or honest, or means no harm, right? So I heard a couple of you say something to that effect. And when I say that I trust someone, it's because I feel safe in their presence, and I heard that too. And I'm also saying that I have a general expectation that the word or promise of someone, whether it's verbal or written, can be relied on, right? And so I can trust that person. So words such as confidence, integrity, hope, and security also come to mind. Confidence can be seen as a sense of self-worth, but in the context of trust, it's reliability, a feeling that it's safe to rely on someone when you need them. Integrity is the practice of being honest and consistently showing a strong adherence to doing what you say and saying what you do. So having integrity is when your moral balance sheet needs no reconciliation. There's nothing to fix there. And hope is an optimistic outlook and the expectation of a positive outcome. It's an emotional investment in the future, and security is a sense of safety from danger, whether it's physical, emotional, or spiritual. It's a state of being comfortable with being your whole self without the risk of harm. So think about what trust means to you, and what aspects of trust do you feel resonated with you? So all of you expressed some form of trust to you. And was there an aspect of trust that you felt was missing from any of these descriptions? And if so, what was it? And if not, did any of the other expressions change your outlook on trust?
I don't think I heard it mentioned, but part of the trust to me also is that I will hear what the person who really thinks I'm doing. You know, they're not going to hide from me. They're going to tell me the truth as to if it hurts me or not. I trust them to do that.
Yeah, definitely, John. Thank you for that. Did anyone else have anything to add to that?
Trust is a feeling that the ability to understand what they're going through and the ability to listen and have compassion.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. Anyone else would like to share?
Yeah, this Octavio. I think it's important, to allow that person to feel, listened to and basically comfortable to be themselves. And I believe somebody mentioned that judgment, so not judging them and just be comfortable around each other. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Octavio. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Albert.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, in light of all these definitions, I think trust is really just the cornerstone, right, of healthy relationships, right? Like,
Yeah.
and it's foundational. It's key to everything that we do as facilitators and mentors
Mhm.
for these boys who we're working in the service of.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you for
Thank
that.
you, Albert. I think, I'm building on what Albert said, but trust is also something, and it's paradoxical because, trust has to be earned, and the only way you can earn it is by giving it. And so we all got to take a risk to earn others' trust. And, and it's a vulnerability that is paradoxical, is all I'm saying. But I know that none of these boys are gonna tell us anything until they know something about who we are and what makes us tick. And if we're not willing to talk about what happened to us and how we felt and the choices we made from those feelings and the price we paid for some of those choices, if we're not setting the bar by being trustworthy, they're not gonna tell us anything.
Yeah, thank you for that, Joe. And Tom posted here, trust takes time to build, consistency and proof that I'm looking out for you. And I appreciate all of this expressions that you've shared with us in the circle, because it's clear that trust is very big. It's a small word and it sounds very simple, but clearly it's not. And it's everything that you have all said so far, and I appreciate that. So let's talk about why trust is important. And Albert's right. It's trust is the cornerstone of every healthy mentee and mentor relationship. It's one of the first things that we do in our circles is establish a safe space with our words and intentions. We do so by stating whatever is said in circle stays in circle, and we request that all participants agree to these terms in the same way that we did here. This minimizes the fear of negative consequences in our sharing. And when mentors honor this, they model trustworthiness. And trust encourages the challenging of one's beliefs. It also encourages risk-taking. When a mentee feels confident that their questions and concerns will be respected, they're more likely to challenge the behaviors that no longer serve them. They're also more open to risk sharing deeper challenges in their lives, which can be shrouded in fear, shame, and guilt. It encourages better communication because there's less risk and fear of words being misrepresented and used as a weapon against them. If there isn't trust, people will hide things from each other and lie in order to avoid those risks, like John said. So when we're building trust, what we're looking for is reliability and integrity. Without reliability, our mentees aren't able to build a relationship with the confidence that the future holds some value between us and them. Without integrity, our mentees have no reason to accept that we will do what we say. And that's detrimental to building trust. So by a show of hands, how many of you struggle with sharing deeper struggles out of fear, shame, guilt, or judgment? just by a show of hands. And how many of you hold back on challenging yourself out of fear of rejection or being seen as weak or not living up to some arbitrary standard? I know I do. And how about holding back on sharing what you really think or feel out of fear of being misunderstood or misrepresented? Yeah, whew. All the hands went up there. So, so thank you for that. And I'm going to take a second here and I'm going to ask, would anyone like to share what their experience was, if any of these resonated with you? Yeah, Octavio.
Yeah, pretty much. I kind of heard like if we are reliable, and basically they're gonna see like we have their backs, right?
Mhm.
That we got them. So being there for them in time of need, and it gives them hope. Like I know that Joe mentioned sharing the story, but basically the whole trust thing, I see it as, hey, we got each other's back.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. Joe? Attila?
Yeah, this is a big issue for me because I enjoy doing this work so much because I'm able to be in a space and create a space that's safe for me to be vulnerable, genuine, authentic. And I spent most of my life not trusting men at all. Anyway, beginning of the first time my dad whipped my ass with a belt. And from that point on, I really didn't trust men. So they had to earn it, the men around me, but I also had to give it in order to receive it. So as Joe's pointing out, needing to earn it, and Mac pointing out about a fear of judgment, and for me, that's what held me back most of my life. So when I get to be in this circle and demonstrate myself as being trustworthy, and I receive that back, then that gives me a lot as a mentor too. But it is a lot about being heard, understood, not judged, and the rest goes on.
Yeah, thank you for that, Attila. Would anyone else like to share something?
Tom, you talked about, does anybody withhold in order to not be judged? And I know that we all have a certain amount of weight we carry, especially with our families and our children's and our colleagues, and that in that there's a responsibility to do no harm. And so sometimes I have to really measure, my delivery, because sometimes I'll tell you, I've had instances where my blood was boiling, and I had to go, look at what it was about me, but I was so triggered, instead of acting on that. Because if I'm not looking in the mirror and looking at my part before I deliver a message, annihilation does not help any situation, and so and then I certainly don't want to be judged as an annihilator. So and I think part of that is about that's building more trust too. If we know ourselves, like none of these kids need a bad dad to tell them what's wrong with them, and it's not hard to get triggered by some of the stories and the behaviors that we observe in a circle, but we got to recognize what is just a reflection for us, and not actually in part of our job as mentors is to meet these guys where they are, and not project and not judge. And it may be unacceptable behavior, but there may be things that about this young man's situation that we are absolutely clueless about, that are leading to these thoughts, these behaviors, these actions. And to be patient and tolerant in a situation where it feels like it's flying in the face of everything that you or me or I believe in. It takes a measured approach for sure. And I don't know, that it's building trust, but it's also maybe not being completely true to ourselves at the same time. So I don't know, it's a balancing act.
Yeah, definitely. It absolutely is. And sometimes we have to wear that mask a lot, right? Yeah, thank you for your shares. And I'm hoping that, as we go through the workshop today, that we'll be able to cover a lot of those things that everyone has talked about. And so, what are those aspects that build trust? And so I heard already today that, listening is a big part of it, and then suspending your judgments. Empathy is really big, being reasonable and authentic and vulnerable. And so we're going to cover all of these things today, and we're going to start with listening. So listening is a conscious effort to hear the words that the other person is saying. And more importantly, it's genuinely striving to understand the complete meaning of what is being communicated. The states of listening I'm about to go through are not a judgment and aren't about right or wrong, but rather it's a tool to recognize where we are in our current ability to listen. So the first one is elsewhere. You're barely listening, merely waiting to speak and thinking of something else while the other person is talking. And then there's self-centered listening, which is listening, but through a filter of your own feelings and judgments and charges. And then curiousness is an unattached and empathetic style of listening. You're in a place of curiosity. And then engaged is the next one, where you're attentive to nonverbal communications such as tone or inflection and body language, and you're tuned into your intuition. And the last one is impactful listening, which is you're hearing what is behind and underneath the communication in a way that creates opportunities for the speaker. So listening is a focus on gaining deeper understanding. It's a feeling of tell me more. And the goal is to focus on curiosity while avoiding the 3 C's, which are convincing, convicting, and converting. You'll want to avoid interrupting, giving advice we've talked about before, soapboxing, and planning on how to make them wrong and you right. You want to attempt to reflect and validate what you heard and ask clarifying questions like how and what questions, as opposed to why questions, which tend to come off as accusatory. So think of a conversation you had recently. So I'll give you a moment to just think of a time that you had a conversation with someone, whether it be recently or within the last week or so. And ask yourself, where was I on the listening spectrum? And just by a show of fingers, where were you on the listening scale? Just throw up some fingers. Yeah. So I think that most of us land somewhere around a 2 or a 3. And that's okay. I don't need to be at a 4 when I'm, chatting up the barista at Starbucks, But if I'm talking to somebody that is close to me, I want to try to be a little bit higher on that scale. And just remember that these aren't judgments. It's just a way to check where you are on that scale. So the next one is suspending judgments. So suspending judgments is withholding decisions or conclusions long enough to understand what is being expressed. So you're cultivating a safe space for the expression of what we aim to understand. When you judge others, you're often judging yourself. If you've ever heard the phrase, you spot it, you got it, it's a reminder that we often dislike and have judgments about aspects that we don't like about ourselves. And this can drive people away or make them think twice about sharing anything meaningful with you. So by suspending our judgments, we give ourselves the opportunity to not be wrong in our assumptions. It also helps develop relationships that we can learn from. And so how many of you find suspending judgments to be difficult or to find it to be a difficult task when you're faced with strongly opposing views? Just a show of hands. Yeah, that one can be tough. Would anyone like to share what happens internally when you're faced with an opposing view? And remember, this isn't a share about your viewpoint, but a share about how you feel, what goes on internally when you're faced with the challenge of enduring an opposing view.
I generally I look forward to opposing views in general. However, when I get feedback from the person that I don't think they understand what I'm saying or what they're saying, I get judgmental. And then it becomes very difficult to respect the person or their viewpoints. So I work at that, it's very difficult today for me.
Yeah, thank you for that, John. Attila?
What I've found for myself is my judgments in most cases comes up immediately. But now that I've gotten a little bit older, I've had enough practice and hit my head against brick walls enough times. I'm more in the practice of going, I still feel that judgment come up. It's like an old version of myself. And then I go, oh, wait a minute, let's ask a few questions and listen and find out if something else is actually going on. But I am absolutely guilty of still some of those first reaction judgments to come up and go, oh, this guy's an asshole. No, he's really not. He's actually, oh, that's not what he meant. Here's what he actually, that sort of thing. And I still find myself going through that process.
Yeah, thank you for that, Attila. Yeah, Albert, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's just a mixed bag for me. There are good days and then there are really bad days. Yeah, it's situations, I guess, not good days, but just situations from person to person. Right. One moment I might find myself just very open-minded to a certain person who I entirely disagree with, for some reason. But I'm like, man, hey, I love this. You hit me with some stuff that I don't understand or I don't know. And I feel it to be like a learning opportunity. And other times, it's just like another person 5 minutes later, and I get amped, I get really worked up inside, and I have this compulsion to just, either want to argue or state my opinion or to say something or to just blabber. So it really just shifts, a lot for me.
Yeah.
And so I have to really try to work on, an awareness of when I'm in those moments and just being like, look, man,
Yeah,
they're just sharing.
thank you. Yeah, definitely.
I was at a meeting yesterday and there was this gentleman who's very boisterous. I've known him for a long time. And I did not confront him, but I started judging him. And as he was talking, I said to myself, what is he trying to say? Not the boisterous self of him, but what is this man? Obviously, he's reaching out in his way, but what is he trying to say? Get behind the madness, because madness is just madness. But what is this guy? What is he trying to say to us? Because he can't say it, and that led me to a word we don't use very much. It's compassion. And so I don't like what he said, but I controlled it by not looking at myself, but what is this gentleman trying to say?
Yeah, thank you for that, David. Yeah, compassion is a big one. Anyone else like to share?
I think what comes up for me sometimes with differing views and opinions and things like that, probably the biggest thing I do, I in a breakdown, I show arrogance and impatience. Those are two things that are really my weak points and probably where the bad side of me comes out. It's just having impatience of, if I have to explain something once, okay, twice, you're annoying me, make me explain my thing like 3 times, and I'm like, I just become an asshole. So I think those are some things that I have to focus on a lot.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mac.
Good work, Mac. I tend to like put myself into situations where I am not surrounded by like-minded folks. I intentionally seek out the other side, and for me, it is a practice of finding the middle ground where we can walk together. And I feel like I have been doing this for like the last 5 years. And I think I've learned a lot about people that hold different values and beliefs than me. And I'm not as quick to judge, and I'm not as quick to reject and anger and get full of my own righteousness. Like Mac was saying, I'm guilty of those things, Mac, for sure. And I don't like that part of me. I don't need to damage any relationships because of what I think.
Yeah, thank you for that, Joe. Definitely.
Can I just say something too, Tom? Like what Joe just said, Max saying, everyone really, I mean, like I don't need to damage something because of what I think. That hit me hard, what David was saying about the whole compassion thing, right? Like when I find myself at my best when I operate from a place of compassion, and I could just sit and look at a person and realize that no matter what it is that they're saying, whether I agree with it or I don't, that's them reaching out, right? Because they wouldn't feel compelled to say what they're saying if they didn't feel the need to. So I can either be a compassionate person and just let them say what they feel they need to get off their chest or off their mind, or like I could be an ass, So I think those are all huge things, takeaways for me.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone.
Yeah, thank you for that. So let's take a look at something that's close to compassion, and let's talk about empathy. So empathy is the ability to recognize and understand and share the thoughts and feelings of another person. So if we understand somebody, then it makes it harder for us to judge them. And when we put effort into understanding another person's experience, we show them that we're willing to put ourselves in their position. It shows them that even if we haven't had that experience, we're open to accepting that experience happen to them. This doesn't mean that we have to even want to help, but it does show compassion, which is a word that I heard a lot of in the last share. A person doesn't have to agree with the actions, beliefs, or opinions of another person to have empathy for the struggle that they're going through. You can respect the person without respecting the ideas. And empathy can be experienced in a few ways. So some may have an emotional understanding that leads to concern or even feelings of distress. Some may have physical responses to another person's feelings. For example, a person may feel flushed in anger or blush in embarrassment when they connect with someone's feelings in those emotions. And so the next one is reasonability, which is just having sound and fair judgment. When we arrive at a conclusion using sound judgment, it's easier for someone to trust that we aren't just making things up. By basing our judgments on evidence, we aren't necessarily going to be more persuasive, but by having a sound method of arriving at our conclusions, we run a lower risk of being untrustworthy. Understanding that reasoning methods will differ from belief to belief, and regardless of whether you agree with someone's reasoning method, it's important to recognize that the person that you're speaking with arrived at their conclusion based on some reasoning method. If that method is understood, you can avoid the pitfalls of misrepresenting what someone is saying. And you can build trust by showing that you understand how they arrived at their beliefs, even if you don't use the same reasoning method or have the same beliefs. Now, basing our inferences on as few biases as possible will allow us to not just understand why our mentees are behaving the way that they are, but also accepting that they're doing the best that they can. They're all different with different circumstances, and no amount of judgment is going to deepen your relationship with them. And the next thing is authenticity, the ability, which is the ability to be introspective and embracing who we truly are while letting go of what we think we're supposed to be. The more honest we are with ourselves and others, the more likely we are to attract people who like us for the right reasons and are similarly honest. By pretending to be someone else, we're being dishonest with ourselves and others, and we deny ourselves the opportunity to cultivate the truth of who we are. When you're true to yourself and others, people don't have to guess who you are or question your integrity. So being authentic means that we're learning to be comfortable with being imperfect. Having compassion means that we recognize the faults in ourselves and others, but despite that, we're open to nurturing the connection that creates a sense of belonging, and belonging bonds us. And the last one is vulnerability. When you expose yourself emotionally in the face of uncertainty, you're willing to accept the risk that comes with the permission to love and be loved. By showing that you're willing to risk being seen for who you are, you're placing your trust in those that you're being vulnerable with. By showing that you're willing to trust, you open the door to being trusted. When we show that we're able to work within the boundaries of that vulnerability, we're showing that we respect emotional and physical safety. This allows the people around you to feel more comfortable being open and honest with you. So take a moment to consider these aspects of trust building. And if you're so inclined, share about one that resonates with you. And I want to invite you to give us some insight into your truth and how it resonates. So I'm gonna do breakout rooms for this one because I want everybody to take a moment to be able to share. And I'm glad that Tom, you're able to fix those technical issues and that you're able to get on the call with us. So I'm going to go ahead and create the breakout rooms, and it looks like.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. So.
Nice to meet you all.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so I'm going to open up the breakout rooms, and I'm just going to go ahead and assign. I'm going to assign you each, and then I'm going to give you each 3 minutes to share. And I want each person to take the full 3 minutes, and I want you to not save your partner by jumping in before the 3 minutes are up, because this is an opportunity for you to stretch yourself if you have a hard time expressing yourself. And for those of you that have done this before, 3 minutes will help you limit the amount of sharing that you do. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. All right, so let's take a look at the aspects that detract from trust. We're going to take a look at dishonesty, dismissiveness, distraction, defensiveness, and discrimination. And the first one we're going to look at is dishonesty. Dishonesty implies that someone is lying, and it can involve cheating, being deceptive, or lacking integrity. This blocks the opportunity for real intimacy based on trust and authenticity. It's a violation of trust and causes the buildup of resentment or withdrawal. Any breach of confidence shows those around us that we're willing to behave selfishly. And as a social species, selfishness is a major hindrance to social bonds. The next one is dismissiveness, which is showing disregard or rejecting someone's ideas. Now, this comes from a place of arrogance and judgment. It's this idea that you know better, and the way that you think things should be done is the way it should be done. And there's a difference between confidence and dismissiveness. Be careful to consider whether you put others down or measure your worth against others. By being dismissive, you project superiority to be considered credible, but this comes with condescension. This is an act of invalidating other people's feelings or ideas, and this comes back to listening. Dismissiveness is listening through a filter of your own judgments. And the next one is distraction, which is simply an interruption in attention. This can be internal or external. So one of the biggest distractions from building a connection is the phone. And the phone can be an object that draws a great amount of attention and can be seen as a lack of interest in the person that we're building trust with. Now, this can be anything external that draws your attention, but the phone happens to be a really big one. And divided attention shows that we value something else, and building trust is extremely difficult in this environment. Distractions can be internal, as I mentioned before, and thoughts will enter your mind at times, and that can draw your attention away from what you intend to focus on. Though this is more difficult to prevent and arguably more difficult to correct, it's just a matter of redirecting yourself when you recognize that it's happening. This is usually harder for the speaker to detect as well. So compared to a physical distraction, this is harder to see. And it hinders the building of a relationship because you've missed out on what was being shared. The next one is defensiveness, which is a coping strategy where we strike out at another person in order to redirect focus away from our own faults and insecurities. It's a sense of righteousness or righteous indignation or anxiety felt when you're being challenged or criticized. Defensiveness is a feeling, or as a feeling, is the sadness, hurt, shame, or anger that comes from the perception of being criticized. Whether that criticism is intended or not, the body still feels capable of feeling defensive. Defensiveness as a behavior describes the actions that are taken after the perception of being criticized. This can come in the form of returning the criticism or sarcasm, or even the silent treatment. I'm sure many of us have experienced that. And the last one is discrimination. And discrimination is an inappropriate and potentially unfair treatment of someone that is in a particular group. While the overt discrimination that we hear about can happen based on age, gender, appearances, race, and so on, it's important to recognize that it doesn't necessarily have to occur at the conscious level. It's a likely predictor of trust because it's an external set of events and experiences that shapes someone's ability to successfully navigate life within a larger society. Meaning, what happens to our mentees has a significant impact on how they navigate their world. Because of these experiences, without the assurance that life is relatively predictable, it's difficult to be sure when or where these experiences will occur again. So our mentees will always be on guard because they can't afford to trust for the fear of their safety. And repeated experiences of discrimination can result in increased depression, poor physical health, chronic illness, and other increased stresses and other things. So let's take a look at how we develop the aspects that build trust. And we're going to take a look back at what we were talking about before when it comes to empathy. So consider the struggle that you've, a single struggle that you've encountered in your life. And think of the one that's really big or the most difficult struggle that you've had. And regardless of what happened, your personal experience of that event or events is still the most difficult struggle you've gone through. Other people, regardless of their circumstances, have had similar feelings to you in definition and intensity. Even though they obviously didn't go through the same thing as you did, we can take comfort in knowing that we've all experienced something that was the most difficult struggle we've ever gone through. So without thinking about the circumstances that caused your struggle, take a moment to put into words what you felt when you were going through that struggle. So I'll give you about 30 seconds or so to think about it. So when you're thinking about how to put these feelings into words, I want you to avoid minimizing words like kind of, or a little, or sort of, or maybe, or some, or other words like that, and be clear about your emotions and consider words like angry, afraid, sad, exhausted, disgusted, ashamed, guilty, and things like that. There's no wrong way to feel. Your truth is your own and your emotions are your own. So share this. I want you to share this with a partner, and remember to keep the circumstances out of the conversation. Keep your sharing focused on the emotions. And I'm going to set the timer for 2 minutes this time, so that way we can get through the rest of this. And for those of you who haven't had much experience talking about your emotions, this will challenge you a little bit. And I invite you to avoid jumping in to fill in the silence, because silence is valuable. And so I'm going to go ahead and break us out into breakout rooms.
Tom,
Yeah.
what I heard you say, I'm not understanding the exercise, because what I heard you say was that we don't talk about what it is,
So
but we talk about the feeling.
that's correct.
And so and then I read the last slide, and I don't know, I don't know how to do one without the other.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So how about I go ahead and model it for you?
Tom, are you saying to leave the story out and just get to
Yeah.
the emotions?
Yeah, leave the story out and get to the emotions. Exactly. So let's talk about the experience, the most difficult struggle that I've gone through, right? So I don't have to talk about what it was, but in that circumstance, I was angry. I felt scared. I didn't know what I was doing, and I felt like I was alone and lost. And does that help? Does that help, Joe?
Yeah,
Helps me.
It doesn't help me, no.
Okay. In that case, feel free to share a little bit of what you went through. And if that helps you propel yourself into the emotions, then feel free to do that. So how many of you noticed that the emotions that you expressed were very similar to what your partner expressed?
Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit.
to some degree.
When we have empathy for each other, we don't really need to know what happened in order to understand what emotions are. And when we consider the emotions that another person is experiencing and accept that those emotions are real, we take the first steps in empathizing and validating the emotions that we're hearing about. The emotions that we each feel inside are personal, and empathy is the recognition that you understand and possibly even feel a similar emotion to the person that you're listening to.
It was very strange when I was talking to a partner. I looked at him with a lot of admiration, but when he started talking about emotions, it was a totally different person that I didn't think he was, because I see him as a leader of this group, and I won't get into how much admiration I have for him, but when he was saying what he said, those emotions, those words, was totally different from what I thought, and it was exceedingly interesting.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, it can shift our perspective a little bit.
A little bit, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so thank you for that. So let's take a look at reasonability. Now, this one's going to get a little heady, which will give us a little bit of a break from what we just did. And so I just want to mention that no one believes anything without having reasoned their way into believing it. So whether that reasoning is sound is a separate concern, but being able to understand how someone arrived at their beliefs will allow you to understand why they think what they do. We often have reasons to believe things. So what we can do to, what can we do to check our biases and assumptions? So with this exercise, I want you to pick a belief that you have. It can be as simple as I believe in ghosts, or acupuncture, or Western medicine, or something that is more deeply held, like I believe in God, or drugs are bad, or a political stance. And think to yourself, I believe in, and then fill in the blank. Now, separate the inferences from the observations, and your inferences are the opinions that you have based on what your observations are. One is fact, and the other is opinion. So it's dark outside is a fact, right? And an inference would be, if it's dark outside, then it's cold outside. And I don't know that that's necessarily true until I check. Right? So this type of reasoning is called inductive reasoning, which is an assumption that is made based on some observations that leads to a general rule. So for the most part, it's usually cold outside when it's dark, but until I check, I don't really know. So we do a lot of this type of reasoning in our lives, but this exact type of reasoning is what leads us to assume things about our mentees that may be completely untrue. And despite how firmly believe these ideas ourselves, it might not be true, and it may not be cold outside, and you're probably not cold, right? You don't necessarily have to use deductive reasoning in most of the things that you do, but while engaging with our mentees, it's important to avoid as many assumptions as possible. So you want to start with a factual statement or a premise, such as a mentee has expressed a challenge with drugs, and then add a more specific statement, such as drug abuse causes challenges. And at this point, I can form a true conclusion because I have enough information or statements to form one. I can conclude that he is struggling with drug abuse. If we move into abductive reasoning, if he mentions that if he mentions drug use and he has expressed a challenge, the logical conclusion might be that he's struggling with drug abuse, but this type of assumption isn't always necessarily true. The main premise of the statement is a mentee has expressed a challenge, and the assumption is that he is abusing drugs, and the conclusion that he is challenged with drug abuse is probable, but not necessarily true. And this is all complicated, but the more you practice deductive reasoning, rather than the other two, you're more likely to make fewer assumptions when you're addressing our mentees. And so there's a little graphic here that you can use to understand the differences between inductive, deductive, and abductive reasoning. So inductive is there are some observations, and you create a general rule out of those observations. And deductive reasoning is that you start with a true statement, and you add true statements until you can create a specific conclusion. And then your abductive reasoning is an incomplete observation that you use to predict something that might be true. And so the next one is sharing. This one's a big one. Joe, did you have something to add?
No.
Okay. Other than showing up and creating a safe space, is arguably one of the next most active things that we do as mentors. So we share our truths and struggles to create connection. It's important to share, and at the same time, it's important to avoid lecturing and taking vitally important time away from our mentees. Some of us sit in several circles a week, and some several a day. And in those circles, there's ample time to share from our own experiences, but our mentees sometimes show up maybe once a week if they're consistent. It's important that when we share, we get to the point without too much meandering or taking on a lecturing tone. Some of us are parents, and it can be easy to fall into that trap. So some people are really great storytellers, and the story has a plot, intrigue, and eventually it comes to a point. But be careful of how many twists and turns you take in that time, because in the context of building trust with the young men in our circles, if you haven't made some point within the first minute, you risk losing your audience. Anything longer than 2 or 3 minutes runs the risk of feeling like a lecture. So if you find yourself wandering through a story, start with your point first and follow up with supporting evidence. So it's important that your share is easy to follow, or you risk muddling your point. And remember that we all have compelling stories to tell, but the most difficult part is communicating it in a concise way. We all have stories that we tell often, so practice paring them down and omitting parts that aren't relevant to the conversation or to making your point in this context. So if you struggle with getting to your point, start with your point. And so, for example, I can start my share with, I messed up a lot in my relationships in the past, and I acted without integrity. Let me share a few instances or an instance where that took place. And so I start with my point, and this ensures that I've made it and I don't lose it along the way when I'm telling my story. So try to keep your stories to a minimum. And if you feel that another mentor has taken enough time, feel free to set up a gesture or a silent signal with your group to hold each other accountable. Or if you're like me, you can just say, I'm hearing a lot of story. And so for this exercise, I want you to think of a story that you've told before. Any story. It doesn't have to be relevant to anything that we're doing right now. And it should be a story that typically takes 5 to 10 minutes to complete. And I'll give everyone about a minute to decide on a story. And for this exercise, I'm gonna break you out into breakout rooms again. And what I want you to do is attempt to tell your story in 2 minutes. On the fly, you'll discover relevant data and less relevant data that you'll need to skip in order to tell your story in 2 minutes. And please don't pick a shorter story just so that you can complete it within the 2 minutes. And definitely don't try to speak faster just so that you can get your story out. This is merely an exercise to learn how to cut out parts that enhance the story, but aren't entirely relevant to making the point. So it's okay if you have more story to tell by the time the 2 minutes are up. And the goal is to recognize how much more story you had left and what you cut out that you may not have wanted to. And then more importantly, what you didn't cut out that you might have or that you could have. The next piece that I want to talk about is authenticity. So without the fear of living up to some authenticity is living without the fear of living up to some arbitrary standard. We open up the opportunity to model what it means to be comfortable and confident in our own skin. Authenticity is more than confidence, though. Confidence is a self-assurance and an appreciation for your abilities, but authenticity is the acceptance of all of yourself, flaws and all. A lot of what we do in our circles is model what it means to be ourselves. By owning who we are as individuals, we also model what it means to exist in a world with people that are very different from us. when we show up, we invite them to recognize that it's okay to be unapologetically you. And that doesn't have to be anything like me. So I'm going to skip the exercise, but I'm just going to go through what the exercise would be, and you can do this on your own. If there was no negative consequence for your behavior, how would you behave? And think back to a time when you felt unable to be authentic. What was the situation and how did you behave and why? And the next part is a reflection on those answers. So which behaviors are the most important to you when it comes to authenticity? There are the behaviors that you're unwilling to compromise on because it's truly you. And what are those must do or must be aspects of yourself? So I encourage you to do this exercise on your own when you have the time to do it. And so these are for yourself. So you don't have to share them with anybody. Just feel free to do it on your own time and as often as you like. I do this exercise fairly frequently. And especially when I have some time to really sit and think about what aspects of me are essential to being me. The next one is vulnerability. So we live in a world where men aren't taught how to express their emotions. You were probably not taught at an early age, and if you've learned, it was likely to have been not too long ago that you learned that it was even okay to have emotions that were more than just anger or joy. And men, like everyone else, experience obviously a variety of emotions, including fear, sadness, shame, and guilt. And regardless of why we didn't learn how to do this, it's important that we start learning to express these emotions and accept that vulnerability, though it may be scary, is at the root of developing deeper relationships. And so here's another exercise that you can do to develop that vulnerability. And I want you to ask yourself if you consistently fall into boring or shallow, unfulfilling conversations. These conversations are safe because you don't have to risk putting yourself on display for those around you to judge you. You don't have to risk being offensive or angering someone with how you feel. You also risk not being insightful. You may come off as disingenuous or uncommitted when you're not vulnerable. And ask yourself, do you avoid dressing well or grooming yourself because it makes you uncomfortable to stand out? Do you find that you avoid sharing your brilliance because it makes you uncomfortable to be in the spotlight? These are behaviors that are manifestations of a struggle with making yourself vulnerable. And so this is an exercise that may challenge you in many ways, and I encourage you to engage it head on. And you'll be challenged to hold space for someone while suspending your own judgments. And the only thing that is required of you is to listen and say thank you at the end. So I want you to go to someone you care about and ask them what they've been trying to tell you that you've been unwilling to hear. So what have you been telling me that I've been unwilling to hear? And if there's someone in mind right now that you don't want to ask this question to, that's probably the best person to ask. So we won't be doing this right now, obviously, but as a challenge and a first step into vulnerability, I recommend that you consider doing this within the next week while it's still fresh in your mind and those listening skills are still there. As you learn and grow your communication skills in these circles, just remember that our mentees aren't necessarily thinking about trust, but they know who they're willing to trust, and that develops over time. You can't make someone trust you, but you can provide the opportunity. Whether or not they trust you will be up to them. By developing these aspects within yourself, you can create an environment that is safe. And when our mentees feel safe, they're more open to trust. So keep in mind that the goal isn't to get them to trust you. The goal is to be a man that they can trust. And that is all a journey within. And so thank you for coming to the workshop. And I know that this one ran a little late, but does anyone have any questions?
No, I really loved that last slide. I loved, and I don't know that everybody on this call has staffed or experienced a rites of passage experience with Boys to Men, but if you pull that slide back up, Tom.
Sure.
This is the nature of the groundwork we're doing in these groups is really about you know, the call to adventure. You know, we're showing them a different side of themselves. We're demonstrating a different side of ourselves. And you know, if you've sat in enough circles, you've actually experienced some supernatural aid. You know, the synchronicity of unfolding. It's just magical. And then so that call to adventure lands on a young man, and then he gets to the threshold, and we literally physically put up a threshold to enter into that sacred space for initiation. And I like how the descent is all about the challenges and the temptations. And these are actually the phases of initiation right here, you know, and I don't want to go too deep into that, but the abyss, the death, the rebirth, that all happens during our sword work. And the transformation occurs, and the young man comes out with a new identity and a new feeling about himself. And he knows what he's got to do to clean up his mess, and then the return back into. So this is a beautiful graphic. It landed really hard on me. I didn't want it to go by without bringing some context to it.
Yeah, thank you for that, Joe. I really appreciate that. This is something that I've discovered is, you know, an ongoing process. Every time that I butt heads with a new thing that I'm trying to work on, I find myself on this cycle. And I've also learned that I'm at different places on this cycle with many different aspects of my life. And so this isn't a cycle for just one thing at a time. I'm experiencing my hero's journey in so many different ways. And it's important that you know, I give myself the space to grow.
Great job, Tom. Thank you, bud.
Yeah,
Yes,
thank
thank
you.
you, Tom. I think we all need to remember the journey never ends.
Amen.
Oh,
Tom.
really?
Well,
Damn
Eat your
it.
banana. Eat your banana.
I'll see some of you guys tomorrow. Good night.
All right. Night.
Great
Good
job,
night.
Tom. Thank you.
yeah,
Good
thanks.
night.
That
Thank
was
you.
excellent. Excellent.
Thank
Fantastic.
Thank you very
Bye,
much,
everybody.
guys. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Take care.
Shout out to Joseph
Bye.
Campbell.